Well, good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and it is great to see you back. And this evening, I'd like to talk about Boris Johnson proroguing government and getting approval from the Queen, no less. This is an absolutely fascinating turn of events, and I don't know if any of you will recall, but I did say in a previous video that this would be the way that Boris Johnson could get Brexit to pass with or without a deal, is by proroguing a parliament. Now, proroguing, for those who don't know, is an ancient but yet powerful tool retained by the Crown, and this all took place many years ago when the Crown started to separate from Parliament, and the Crown was losing control to Parliament. Anyway, the Crown retained the power to open government, to close government exclusively. In other words, Parliament cannot open without the Crown doing an opening speech and actually formally opening Parliament for a sitting, and also the right to prorogue, which means to essentially just shut down government. Now, this is not the same as an adjournment or closing for the end of the season. Proroguing comes with some very special conditions, and that is all bills prior to prorogation that were in passage are dropped. They no longer can be passed into law, and they must be absolutely go back to the point zero with introduction, so they have to have 3 readings, and the Queen has approved. Boris Johnson went to the Queen the other day, and the Queen has approved to prorogue government until October the 14th, when she will open it with a Queen's speech. And by that time there will just not be enough time to present any of the old bills to get them through the 3 readings, to get them onto the floor. But Boris Johnson has promised that any negotiations that take place, there will be time to vote on those negotiations. And of course, the European negotiators are absolutely crapping their pants. Macron is running around screaming that he's going to drop the October 31st deadline, so there's more time to negotiate. They finally realised that they are dealing with someone who can actually negotiate. Now, I will clarify this because, you know, I have no idea at this point in time, to be quite honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, I have absolutely no idea what is true, what is false, what people really stand for. Is there some deceit going on here, some behind the scenes trickery? I have absolutely no idea. I'm trusting that Boris Johnson is true to his word, and that Nigel Farage is true to his word, and that Brexit means Brexit. Now, normally, you know, prorogation is one of those things that, especially if it's used in a flimsy way, is something that I dislike to see happen to Parliament, because it is so devastating. You know, there are many really good bills, you know, some backbenchers putting forward people's bills, they all drop with prorogation. So there is definitely a downside to prorogation. But in this particular case, there has been so much needless discussion and argument about this process. 3 years and still no deal has been reached. This is absolutely appalling. This is an appalling waste of money to do all of this and achieve absolutely nothing. But more than that, well, let's go to these 2 articles, and I'll come back and do a quick wrap up. Okie dokie, here we go. And this from the Express. Queen agrees to suspend Parliament. Victory for Boris as Corbyn's plea for meeting ignored. The Queen has approved Boris Johnson's request to prorogue Parliament after the Prime Minister stepped up his plans for a no-deal Brexit. Prime Minister Boris Johnson sparked panic among Remainers after he confirmed he asked the Queen, who is currently in Balmoral, to agree to suspend Parliament days after MPs have returned to work next week. The Privy Council met at Balmoral today to discuss Mr Johnson's new administration holding a Queen's speech on October the 14th. In a letter to MPs outlining his government's plans, Mr Johnson denied it was to force through a no-deal Brexit, and said he would be bringing forward a bold and ambitious domestic legislative agenda which MPs would be able to vote on in October. A central feature of the legislative programme will be the government's number one legislative priority if a new deal is forthcoming at the EU Council to introduce the withdrawal agreement bill and to move at pace to secure its passage before October 31st. The Queen approved the request this afternoon that the act of proroguing Parliament would take place no earlier than Monday the 9th of September and no later than Thursday the 12th of September. The move means the Queen's speech formally opening Parliament and laying out the government plans would take place on October the 14th. But Remainers have reacted in fury, as the move will mean they have little or no time to block a no-deal Brexit and accuse Mr Johnson of mounting a coup against Parliament. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said he immediately wrote to the Queen requesting a meeting with her. Mr Corbyn said in a statement, "I'm appalled at the recklessness of Johnson's government, which talks about sovereignty and yet is seeking to suspend Parliament to avoid scrutiny of its plans for a reckless no-deal Brexit. This is an outrage and a threat to our democracy." Didn't we vote on this? This is what I'm talking about. Do you want to deal with these people? Do you want these people in charge of stuff where they won't hold to a deal? Be careful what you wish for, my friends. And again from the Express, Brexit just got real. Germany reacts to Boris Brexit proroguing plans with genuine fear. Europe has been left fearful of no deal by Boris Johnson's plan to prorogue Parliament in order to force through Brexit. And of course this is exactly the kind of thing again we're talking about. Nathalie Loiseau, a French MEP and close ally of Emmanuel Macron, said we could see a Brexit coming without agreement. Here it is moreover a Brexit without debate that looms. What disease does British democracy suffer from for fear of debate before making one of the most important decisions in its history? Well, no disease, because they've been debating this for 3 years without effect. The vote was to leave. Oh yes, here it comes. Take back control, so this is what democracy a la Boris Johnson looks like. A pile of shards is on the horizon. The fear-mongering. The fear-mongering. Don't you worry, folks. It will be fine. Well, it just warms my heart to see that the Queen actually does have a sense of humour and that she is actually on Britain's side, because this is going to tip the scales, I believe, and I think that we are going to finally get Brexit. But the point I was going to make is that, the people that we are dealing with here, and these are the Remainers, they just will not accept that they lost the vote. Look, we live in a democracy. The question was put to the people, and a majority of the people voted to leave Europe. That's that. And I can absolutely assure you that if this was the other way around, if the Remainers had won to stay in Europe, we wouldn't be talking about all the negotiations and ins and outs and so on and so on. Oh no, we'd have to accept it. We'd have to accept that we lost the vote and they won and that we were remaining in the EU. Well, you didn't. You lost the vote and we're leaving the EU. So why can't you just accept that? And I would put that out as a broader question to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Is this the kind of people that you want to deal with in the real world? People who can't take a loss? When you shake hands on a deal, the deal's not the deal. It's all open to renegotiation if the other party loses. Because I don't like negotiating under those circumstances. When I lose, I accept my loss. That's just the way it goes. And I applaud my win if I happen to win in a negotiation situation. But when a deal is a deal, and you can't hold yourself to that deal, I don't really want to deal with you, because it means that the deal's never done. You're never going to stop whining and crying and complaining. Just accept the fact that you lost the vote and that Britain should leave Europe. That is the will of the people, to leave Europe, because the majority of Britons, thank God, have realised they do not want to be ruled by an unelected bureaucracy. And that is my number one complaint with the EU and globalism, because it leads to being governed by unelected officials who are not responsible for their actions. And so they can afford to keep going back to try and get another vote and so on and so forth. And as I've said in other videos, there is ample evidence where the EU has just not accepted the people's vote and have gone back and asked them to re-vote on different treaties, the Lisbon Treaty, the Madrid Treaty, and even the European Constitution, which they even completely ignored the people's vote. I mean, it's just absolutely outrageous that anybody would want to walk into a situation like that. You know, we must always retain some sovereignty, and we must always retain the right as the owners. We're the owners, we're the ones who pay for everything, and it is absolutely imperative that we retain the right to elect or unelect our government depending on how they behave. So kudos to Boris Johnson for using the prorogation to halt the whiners and the naysayers. You lost the vote, accept it. Well, okay, if you've enjoyed this video, please comment, like and subscribe below, and please share. YouTube are still messing around with the algorithms, although it looks like we may have some success if you see the previous video about the FairTube Union. But if you can share this video, it really does help when you do that. And in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we'll talk very, very shortly. See you now. Bye.